Good morning. My name is Aaron Weller. I'm one of the co-founders of Sentinel. I'm very excited to be running our virtual launch event today. We're releasing Ethos for general availability. Ethos helps organizations build privacy confidence by what we call a culture of privacy throughout your organization. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to explain what we mean by that and how Ethos can help accelerate your privacy program at the same time as preserving value from any existing investments in privacy technology. We live in a brave new world where organizations have more data than they've ever had before, and they're using it in a lot of different ways. Regulations and laws are very dynamic, but not as dynamic as customer expectations. We're also seeing that a lot of organizations that we work with remain focused on tactical, compliance-focused technology solutions. So one of the things that we were looking for is how could we help organizations think a little bit differently about privacy. With the market as it was, with the explosion of privacy technology solutions, we still felt that there was a gap really helping organizations decide on the best strategy for them. What we were seeing were a number of common pain points. Our clients were saying that they wanted to make sure that the privacy program was delivering value to customers, shareholders, and employees. They wanted to be able to leverage data effectively, not just be the part of the organization that said, well, no, you just can't do that. Definitely, they wanted to meet their customer expectations as well around innovation and using this data and not just locking it up. With the number of privacy laws that have changed and continue to change in the last couple of years, really, how do you get your arms around all of these changing considerations and how they apply to your organization? Particularly when you have different locations that do different things, different data types and different ways they use data. All in all, how do privacy programs really support the core business at a time of immense change? So we sat down a couple of years ago as the founders of Sentinel and said, you know, we think that we can make this better, but how do we do this? What we tried to do was to leverage some things that have worked before for us in other places, using successful patterns to think about structuring privacy programs, leveraging technology to provide some automation, consistency, and visibility across some complex requirements and scenarios. How do we standardize some of that language and messaging? Because one of the really interesting things about privacy is that you touch so many different parts of an organization. Really getting that standard messaging when people are speaking different languages, whether you're a lawyer, a technologist, working with a marketing program, getting that consistency when even the laws aren't consistent in how they describe some of these terms can be a real challenge. But fundamentally, we wanted to help organizations evolve just beyond chasing compliance and really be able to get ahead of using privacy to look down the road and not constantly at where you'd be. So really, how do we think about this as changing the status quo? What we really wanted to solve for was to help people think about a proactive approach to adapting to change, rather than an often reactive approach that we see even at very large organizations. We wanted to drive business and innovation enablement through privacy. It's often talked about privacy as a differentiator, but how do you really achieve that when you're always chasing what the last regulation to change was? And then really kind of driving that visibility and measurability. When you have so many stakeholders and personas who really are interested in privacy, from executive management all the way down to people at the level where they're implementing controls and working with new technologies and systems, how do you get that measurability and consistency with some good metrics and scorecards as well? So we call our approach privacy confidence. What we're really trying to do is to help organizations build that confidence in that they know what their organization is doing with personal information, that they know that the way that they're portraying that externally is consistent with the way that they're actually using it, and really to provide confidence when you get a complaint or a regulator inquiry that you know there aren't really skeletons in the closet. You have that transparency as to what the program is. What we do see is that you're probably all familiar with the status quo, kind of going round and round in the hamster wheel, constantly chasing compliance. You know that doesn't work, and we believe Ethos can help get you out of that wheel. So how do we do it? One of the things that we came up with was what we call this culture of privacy model. You may have seen the articles that we've published recently through the IAPP that describe this in a lot more detail. What we started with was the premise that legal obligations are not equivalent to privacy, although many organizations, that's really all they've been able to focus on. In addition to that, you've also got, particularly if you're more of a processor organization, a lot of contractual obligations that restrict what you can do with personal information. So these top two segments are really what we call the must-have pieces of your program. But then you also have some should-haves as well. So ethical considerations are increasingly being talked about as part of a good privacy program. But ethical considerations are rarely formally incorporated into a privacy controls framework or model. Also, customer centricity. We all want to make sure that our customers are happy, whoever our customers are, but really, how do we incorporate their perspectives and expectations when they go above and beyond what the law may require, particularly when the law may require different things in different jurisdictions? How do you provide that consistent experience to customers? And then last, but definitely not least, strategic. So how do your strategic goals as an organization fit into your privacy framework? We've seen some leading privacy programs make public statements like, CCPA requires us to do this in California, but we're actually going to provide this right across the whole of the United States. Well, how do you then build that and manage that and make sure you're still doing that as part of an overall privacy program? So the way that we've built Ethos is to take all of these factors and say, we don't really care where these requirements come from, as long as there's traceability. But we want to be able to build and manage a privacy program that can take all of these inputs and drive the right program for your organization. We treat each input as a set of rules, and then Ethos does the rest. So what we're trying to do is to really make privacy work for you rather than the other way around. I'll show you in a minute when I switch to the live demo as how we model how privacy fits your organization, rather than actually taking the law and then trying to make your privacy program be kind of that square peg in the round hole and fit your organization to the privacy requirements, rather than trying to find a way to do it the other way around. One of the pain points we often hear is that policy and practice can be very disconnected and misaligned. So your public-facing statements may not actually reflect reality, which can be a real concern if you're doing things with data or collecting more data than you're publicly stating. It can get you into a lot of trouble. And one of the other things that we're hearing from our clients as a pain point is that how do you really think about what changes are going to mean to your program before they happen? You may have seen this week that there was enough signatures gathered by the campaign in California to put a so-called CCPA 2.0 onto the ballot in November. So what will the impact be on your organization? With Ethos, we can literally press a button and show you the difference between what your program looks like today and what it will look like if that ballot measure passes. That's a very powerful functionality that we think is really useful when an executive comes and says, I saw this in the paper, what does this mean for us? So really we can boil this down to three key benefits of Ethos. The first one is that we eliminate guesswork. By modeling your privacy organization, we understand what applies to you. Once you've done that modeling, you can then use that as your organization adapts. You can clearly see what you've done and what's left to do across even complex organizations with many moving parts. What this allows you to do is to gain insight, some real-time visibility into where are you today and how is that trending. One of the things that we can do with our data model is we can age all of the documents you upload. We can age all of the requirements. So it's very clear that, you know, if you did training a year ago and now it's kind of overdue, all of those kind of alerts will come up through the tool and allow you to say, oh yeah, you know, I can see that this is coming up in the next couple of months. You can then model the future, plan your work. And the third major benefit is really that you can execute and scale effectively. Ethos is not designed to replace your existing privacy technology investments. In fact, quite the opposite. We're talking with a number of existing privacy technology companies about integration between Ethos and their platform. And I'll talk about why that is good for all of us in a second. But what Ethos also allows you to do is integrate with existing tools such as Jira, ServiceNow, other ticketing systems. We don't want to create yet another place where you have to go and look for things to do, but to integrate with the technology that your teams are already using and know how to use. So we can push requirements from Ethos out into other technologies or into the other applications used by the business, or pull in status in the other direction and then report up at a program level. So what Ethos does is really sits as over your existing technology, your enterprise privacy toolchain, as we call it. We do really see Ethos as being complementary. We're not trying to provide cookie management services or DSRs or a lot of those other, important but tactical considerations. What Ethos does is allows you to interoperate and to pull in all of those things into a single pane of glass. Think of it like, if you're security minded, a SIM for privacy, where you're bringing all of those events together in one place so that you can take appropriate action. So I'm going to walk through what Ethos looks like right now, and what we have found to be particularly useful is to help walk through your specific scenarios. So if you're interested, after the demo is finished, there's a link on our website at cultureofprivacy.com/ethos where you can sign up, and we can actually run through with some real data from your environment. So what I'd like to do now is to switch over to the Ethos platform itself and show you what this looks like. So our experience consulting with a wide range of organizations has taught us that because all organizations are different with different strengths and weaknesses, privacy teams shouldn't have to spend time working out what requirements apply to which type of the organization. You want to build an effective program, not get stuck in analysis paralysis. So as I mentioned earlier, Ethos allows you to build a model of your organization, and I've mocked up a fairly simple organization here. What we've done is to build different parts of the business, and we call these business contexts. And if I hover over one of these, you can see that the way that we've built a business context is to look at the way that privacy requirements typically apply to organizations. So we tend to start off with geography, because some laws apply geographically. So CCPA applies to residents of California. Often laws also apply to types of data. So you may find that a data type could be, for example, HIPAA may apply to medical data. And then some laws apply from a use case perspective. So looking at CAN spam, for example, in the US, if you do email marketing, that law will apply. So by building our business contexts and actually having variation between them, it allows us to build a model of your privacy organization and the way that you use things. What we have is we cascade the requirements down from what we call a global business context. So what this allows us to do is to say, if there are things that are at a global level, you will then be able to inherit those down the chain. So if we set up a global program that says, well, we are in Brazil, but we're not in Argentina, none of the children down the chain can actually go into Argentina without you knowing about it. If somebody tries to change or set up a business context, that will then flag an alert and say, this isn't in the global program. Are you sure that that's really what you want to do? What this also allows you to do, and one of the ways that we've been discussing working with some of our existing clients, is that you can use this really, if you input your existing privacy notices. Let's say that you have a US privacy notice that's separate from your European privacy notice. You can start here. And one of the things that we've done is to build our taxonomies around what we see in common privacy notices. So when you go through and you look at the different types of data you have and the different use cases, you can input all of those here and then see at a glance, because I can say, okay, which of these organizations actually have customer service, for example? Okay, Brazil is where my customer service organization is. This allows you very easily to see the way that your organization uses personal information. And as part of our roadmap that Chris, our CTO, can talk to towards the end, we're really looking at getting inputs from tools that do data discovery and other things that could then pre-populate some of this information so you don't have to input it manually. So again, we're going to give you options and ways to do this. So if I look at actually setting up a business context, let's create let's edit Brazil for a second here. So you can see that, as I described, the way that we think about how privacy applies to your organization is really through these three different panes of glass here. So one is the different types of data. So we've got a taxonomy in here around different types of data. We've deliberately not gone down to the data element level, but if you really wanted to, you could do that. The way that our model works is we have a curated set of, these are the things that you get out of the box, but we've built the model in a way that our customers can then adapt that as they need to meet their own specific requirements or policies they already have. So that's the different types of data. You can then see here that we have Brazil selected right now. As I mentioned, if I want to go into, let's say that we're going to go into Argentina, at the moment, Argentina's grayed out because at an organizational level, we said, well, we can't go into Argentina. That's not part of our global strategy right now. So if that was going to change, we'd go back to the global business context and then work out how that would then cascade down, how we would incorporate those new things. One of the interesting things that we'll come back to in a couple of minutes is, you're probably familiar, there is a new law that's going to come out now next year in Brazil, which is pretty similar to GDPR in a lot of ways. And we can look at what the differences are between that law and your existing framework. The other piece here on the right is how are you using the data? So this is one of those areas where, again, we've started off with a taxonomy that has a number of different data uses. And you can see all of our taxonomies are hierarchical. So depending on how you'd like to set this up, and again, we've put in some data to start off with, your marketing department may think about things in a different way, but we can then go through and make these changes and reflect that in the way that you think about your organization. It's important as well that sometimes laws apply to different types of data, not just from a data type perspective, but also about whether it's, say, employee information or customer information. So we can select that as well. And what we can then do is that you can see different parts of your organization. You may treat employee privacy differently, so we can capture all of that information as well. One of the other things that if you're a data processor organization, we've set up some of the processing activities that you might do as also being things that you can capture as use cases. So we can go and see these data processor use cases. If I look at some of the ways that we think about, so under business relationships, if we're providing services to other business and some of those processor requirements are actually going to come in, we can then add those in and say, okay, now we know that parts of the organization are going to be data processors. We can treat those requirements separately as well. All makes sense so far, hopefully. So again, the business context tree really gives us a lot of flexibility with modeling your organization. The great thing is once you've done this, you then have a lot of power over what parts of the organization are doing what things. So let's go in and look at what it looks like within a specific business context. So on the left-hand side here, you can see this is what we call our components model. What we've done is that because there is a lot of variation in the way that different privacy laws and requirements describe what is basically the same thing, what we've done is said that really privacy organizations have these 12 different things that they do. We've then mapped our content team, when they take a framework, what they'll do is they'll then map all of the requirements to one of these 12 areas. It again gives you that consistency in the way that you're thinking about and describing your program, particularly when you're working with other parts of the organization. What we then have is you can see that we have business requirements here. In this case, let's look at, so what we've done is, again, we've got this traceability back to where the requirements came from. So you can go and look up the exact text of the law. As I mentioned earlier, Ethos is not intended to be a compliance tool as such. but we do want to provide that traceability back and give you the flexibility in the reporting that you can track status against a particular framework. But what we'd like to do is to take away some of that, all of the different, the legal language, and provide these requirements in a way that people in your organization, your technology teams, can really understand. One of the things that we've also seen that we think is a weakness of some of the other platforms that are out there is that the requirements is pretty much as far as they go. But you well know, if you've implemented any of these laws, that requirements alone are not enough. Really what you need to do is get down to the next level as to how do I go and implement a new privacy notice worldwide. So what we also have is then our consulting team has got them broken down all of those requirements into the specific tasks that go through. So what you can do is then track progress at an individual task level that then roll up to the requirements, that then roll up to the components. And all of this is then reflected in our dashboarding module. So what we can do here is then we can what we call pivot and track the status of your program in different ways, either at the task level, which may be useful in some circumstances, or the requirement level. We can also track the status of these things over time. So in addition to being able to say, you know, this is where we are today, and this is of course all test data, you can then say, okay, we just want to track kind of where are we with GDPR? You know, how is this working over time? You know, how has it progressed, particularly if we have an emerging deadline coming up? So the reporting is pretty flexible. It allows us again to assign. So one of the things that you can do with the business contexts is we can assign metadata at the business context level. So I could assign, let's say I'm going to assign Chris as the owner of my US privacy team and operations, and then I'm going to assign Danielle as the owner, the owner over in the European area. So what that's then going to allow us to do is to then track Chris's tasks against Danielle's tasks, and we can see kind of where things are going. So that flexibility by assigning things at the business context level, and we can also add in other things like, you know, we can attach the US privacy notice, we can track some of those documents there and attach them to where they go in the business context. This will be particularly useful if you're doing things like binding corporate rules, where you need to know what are my legal entities, which ones have signed up. One of the great things that we can do is, again, I mentioned not just the legal frameworks, and we have a few of these here in the demo environment. What we can also do is we can add in additional frameworks. And what these could be, let's imagine that you already have a privacy policy in your organization. We can add that privacy policy in and any of the controls that are associated with it as a framework. We could add your BCRs in as a framework. If you have an MSA with Microsoft that's got particular security and privacy requirements, we can add that in as a framework. So all of these things that you could add in, and you can see going back to what I talked about in the deck around, let's say strategically that you wanted to do ISO 27018 if you're a cloud provider, that may not be legally required, but it might be something you say, yep, we want to sell more of our product, our clients are asking for this, we're going to go and do it. We can add in those frameworks that go beyond just legal compliance and give you the ability to track everything all in one place. So within our, so I just looked at the frameworks. Another thing we can look at is with the requirements catalog. And again, one of the things that you're getting with Ethos is then our content team is continually updating and adding new regulations into our catalog. So as long as you have an Ethos license, you will continue to get updates. But what we allow you to do is that we have a curated catalog that will then be updated by our team over time. But as I mentioned earlier, you then also have the flexibility to be adding in your own requirements that as we update our catalog, those won't get overwritten. And you can add in that same tagging back to, you know, which business context would it apply to, you know, what types of data, you know, in certain geographies. It gives you that flexibility to add in, again, not just the external requirements, but then anything that's unique to your organization as well. So one of the other things that that I mentioned earlier, but I wanted to show you, was that we've got this organization now set up, but organizations change. So there are two real types of scenarios where things can change that Ethos can help you with. One is if external requirements change, and the other is if your organization changes. So if external requirements change, what we can do is we can actually drag forwards into the future and say, okay, in the future, there may be some new requirements. Let's say that the new CCPA replacement or the Brazilian law is going to come into effect. If I'd picked a business context that actually had those requirements, you could see that over time, the requirements would actually change and some of your percentages would actually go down of completion. What you can then do is run a report that says, this is what we're doing today, this is what we will be doing in 6 months' time, and then work out how to project plan for that. So that's if there's an external requirement, and that would all be driven through the framework. And again, because we know what your organization looks like, we're then not going to send you, like I get all the time, oh, here's a webinar about the new Brazilian law. If you're not in Brazil, that's not going to pop up. But if you are, we can say, look, this is going to affect you, and this is what the change will look like. So it's very dynamic. The other kind of change, and we showed you a little bit of this earlier, let's say that I wanted to then say, well, my Brazilian organization, you know, I'm now going to collect, I'm not going to collect medical information anymore. So you can go in and change the business context or do a proposed change and say, oh, what happens if I don't collect this data? Or let's say I start collecting geolocation or biometric data. How's that going to affect my program? So again, by making the change here, you can then see that flow all the way through into the requirements, into the reporting. So it really does tie everything together. So as I mentioned earlier, using modern tools and APIs, Ethos is compatible with many other systems that are out there. So you don't have to get rid of your existing investments. What Ethos does is really complement those, any privacy technology you already have. It allows you to use your existing tool sets, and it also allows you to really scale as your organization grows. Some of our design principles are we feel that the mid-market is very underserved, and we want Ethos to be able to be used by organizations that don't have a huge privacy team. Think of this as almost like your chief of staff of your privacy program. It remembers all of the different things that you're doing, what the status is. You can upload documents as evidence. You can really keep track of everything all in one place. And then if somebody leaves your team or changes over, you then don't have to go back and find, you know, here's an Excel spreadsheet from a year ago. You actually have that real-time status of where the program is. So really, hopefully I've given you an idea that Ethos is a different kind of privacy tool. It's designed to help all kinds of organizations define and manage their privacy programs and to do it in a way that really fits their organization. What I'd like to do now is to turn it over to my colleagues, and maybe Chris, you can talk a little bit about, you know, where we've been with the roadmap and what we're really looking forwards to doing in the next couple of months. And maybe also a little bit about some of the experiences we've had with onboarding our first couple of customers onto Ethos.
Absolutely, Aaron. Thank you. And great demo. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Carter. I'm the CTO here at Sentinel. We're super excited, obviously, for the launch today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the future looks like for us based on the past that we've experienced so far. So as Aaron told you, we started this company with this vision of looking for the gaps in privacy and really solving for the things that we experienced as practitioners, as technologists, and looking then into the future of what we see coming with things like GDPR originally, and then now with these additional regulations coming on, and how do we deconflict this environment that we're in, where enterprises see opportunity and are trying to drive opportunity for their customers, but need to do so in a way that respects their customers' personal information, responds to regulatory requirements, and anticipates contractual constraints as well. So we started Sentinel looking at how do we control for data itself? How do we analyze and understand the usage of personal information within an organization, and quickly realize that most organizations don't even have a level of maturity where they can implement something like that effectively. And we wanted to solve for them the programmatic elements. And as you saw in the demo today, that's where we're squarely targeted right now, is how do we help you get your hands around the program that you must implement in order to fulfill all the constraints that you got within your business. As we move into the future, then what we're looking at is how do we take that solid foundation of an operational program that's working properly, that's respecting the consumer constraints that exist within the business, that's enabling business innovation on top of those constraints. How do we take that then and make it more effective? And so what we're looking at next is deeper integration with existing privacy tools, deeper integration with the business itself. As Aaron talked about, we're moving into things like Jira and ServiceNow integrations. We hope to expand that within the next couple quarters to a broad range of engineering planning systems and ticketing systems and issue management systems, where you can not only drive the implementation work out to the business, but then take that understanding automatically of how the business is performing and compare that to the program expectations itself. So you really get this broad perspective and understanding of how well you're doing and what that actually means to the business in terms of reducing risk and creating opportunity. Our goal is for all of our customers to eventually shift from a very risk-oriented perspective, as you saw within the presentation, to more of an opportunity-oriented perspective, where they're looking at brand differentiation, a better usage of data to compete within the market, and ultimately looking at that overall programmatic approach as a driver and a supporter of all of those goals. Beyond that, from a functional perspective, we're continuing to expand the platform's capability to understand the business, to collect additional information either from those integrations, or we have customers who are looking at bringing in actual organizational metrics and behavior analysis and operational data into the system itself. As Aaron was talking about, looking at owners of business context, we want to continue to expand that so you can include any type of information that you're already collecting organizationally and bring that alongside your privacy program so that the measurement of that program is then directly correlated to how well the business is doing and understanding what the return on that investment is for how the program operates. And then looking even further into the future, we're moving into spaces like IoT, consumer data interaction, bringing a lot of those kind of future innovations that organizations are getting into now and directly applying privacy automatically to that, getting out of this model where you have to go and kind of manually implement everything and moving into a place where privacy can just kind of automatically exist within the business. And really that brings it back to our overall culture of privacy message, which is we want to help organizations build this fabric into how they do everything, where privacy just happens. It's not something that you have to be blocking, innovation and work with. It's something that will just happen because those habits and rituals are then baked into every aspect of the organization. And the Ethos platform is what enables that and drives that to everyone.
And Chris, we had a question in the Q&A. In the task management functionality, how does that play with different ticketing systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as Aaron alluded to, we have workflow baked into Ethos itself. And the way that workflow operates is that we require tasks to be closed out and work to be done to consider requirements to be implemented. How that works with external ticketing systems is you can assign tasks within Ethos to those external systems just as if they were another person within Ethos itself. So that means if you have an engineering team that has some set of privacy requirements that it has to fulfill in order to ship a product, you can actually assign those tasks to that engineering team. They'll do all their work in their, say, Jira backlog like they already would. And as they're executing that work and supplying proof of execution, that automatically gets applied back to Ethos, and we can track that work and the implementation progress directly within the Ethos tool. And then you can see that across the entire program in one place and understand the impact of that engineering work. At the same time, you can also see where work hasn't been done and understand where that risk exists within your organization if teams that you're assigning this to are not actually performing on that execution.
Yes, we had another one. How are organizations using this to prioritize their work?
Yeah, great question. So as we kind of alluded to, risk management is that starting point for most privacy teams. And that's where a lot of organizations that we interact with are still in that risk management mindset, which everyone still has to deal with. It never goes away. But understanding where that risk applies across the organization is one of the biggest drivers we've seen for prioritization of work. So what we have right now is the capability to understand risk from kind of the simple model of here's how much work there is to be done within different parts of the organization. And as we continue to develop this platform, and one of those roadmap items that we have next is actual risk assessment functionality on top of that, to quantify what the risk is within these different parts of the organization, and then see at a very high level and kind of quick glance where those pockets of risk exist. And then you can prioritize based on that. Another way that organizations are using this is by simply looking at what work needs to be done where, who's actually executing against it and how fast, and looking at that overall velocity as a means to identify within the organization different functions in the organization, different organizational units, who's moving fast and who's not. Where do we need to apply resources that we have? As we know, most organizations have a limited set of resources. They're looking at what does that level look like in order to get us over the line on things like GDPR, CCPA, these kind of broad regulatory programs that need to be stood up quickly, and then moving on from there into things like contractual constraints and other models that still apply that maybe are a little less important because there isn't quite the immediacy of the regulatory action behind it.
We had another question, Chris, around how would you say this differs from something like a OneTrust? And I'm happy to take that.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
As I mentioned earlier, we're not looking to kind of displace any existing investments in privacy technology. Really, we see a platform like a OneTrust or a Wirewheel or Security.ai, where they're doing a lot of those, the day-to-day operational pieces, DSRs and cookie management and some of the other pieces that, are the day-to-day work of privacy operations. What we see is that really Ethos complements those types of technologies where we're providing kind of that management executive level view, that joined up view across the organization, where we've got that flexibility with the business context tree to allow you to work with a platform like OneTrust in different ways in different jurisdictions. And as Chris was saying earlier, to kind of, we would hope at some point to get integration directly, but we can integrate through ticketing systems and effectively then drive activities through some of those existing tools.
Yeah, I'll add to that too, that the overall vision here is not even to compete really with a OneTrust. It's to actually enable OneTrust to be used more effectively. We've had one of our customers refer to Ethos as kind of their single pane of glass across the privacy organization. So as they purchase different privacy platforms, things like OneTrust or Big ID or other tools, really Ethos can be that kind of unifier across all those pieces and actually make them more valuable, because then you can use the most effective parts of those tools, see the behavior and measurement that those tools provide you, but then bring it back again to that overall program view and understand, are we truly being effective here? Are we leveraging these investments that we've made in privacy tools? And are they actually driving the behavior that we want to see that's going to create, again, that culture of privacy across the organization?
There's a question around reporting functionality, and I think I covered this earlier, but really what you saw with our reporting module is really just scratching the surface of the platform's abilities. That the way that we design the underlying data model is that everything is really attribute based, so that we can report out on pretty much anything that the platform can see. So if you're reporting up to executives, depending on what they're looking for, whether as I said, you could report and pivot against a framework. How are we doing with implementation against this upcoming law, which is a question executives often ask, because those are the kinds of things that they see in the press and their kind of peers are talking about. But also we could provide, let's say that there was concerns around the status of privacy impact assessments, for example. We could show across an organization where those are being done, how effective those requirements have been implemented, where those tasks haven't been updated for a while. So depending on kind of what an executive is looking for, the way that we've thought about the reporting is really that we have a number of different personas in mind, whether it's an executive, whether it's someone who's running a privacy organization, whether it's someone who's actually down, doing the day-to-day work. The reporting is flexible to provide for the things that they should need to know, but at each of those different levels.
In addition to that, too, in terms of integrating with the rest of the organization, the platform itself is fully accessible to existing enterprise reporting tools. So for instance, we have folks working on Power BI integrations to it, Tableau integrations, Click integrations, where that data model and all of the information that we collect behind the scenes is fully available to those tools, so it can be integrated into existing enterprise reporting frameworks and not have to create a whole new silo of reporting that exists within the organization.
And then Chris, could you talk a little bit about the security and SSO and kind of the deployment models as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So from the beginning, security was extremely important to us, as you can imagine, in the privacy space. That's not something that you want to screw up early on. So from the very beginning, we've been building this platform with a mind towards how does this integrate within enterprises that have robust security frameworks. So for instance, ISO 27001 certification, as well as integrating directly with corporate directories. We support single sign-on right now. I think we've got an Okta integration that's going to be releasing this quarter. We integrate with Active Directory from the get-go. So the minute this thing is deployed within your organization, you've got that single sign-on experience, and you've got that control over not just who can access the system and who can work within it, but also understanding that, again, as Aaron alluded to before, as the organization changes over time, those changes will be reflected immediately. You don't have to maintain a separate set of users, and it plays nicely right along all your other tools that you've got. And then, behind the scenes, we've built into this all of the kind of standard trappings of a highly secure system where we're encrypting data at rest. We've got SSL everywhere, and all the wonderful toys that you expect out of the gate from an enterprise system.
Great. So if anyone else in the audience has any other questions, please feel free to ask them now. But otherwise, Ryan, Danielle, do you want to close us out if we don't get any more questions?
Sure, that sounds great. So I'll just share a little bit backing up around Sentinel and how we all came together, and let some people actually offer more questions if they have them. Ultimately, our founding team has a background in building businesses, and in particular in technology. A few years ago, when GDPR was emerging, we started discussing what the implications looked like, and how we could actually help continue the velocity of innovation while also driving successful privacy outcomes. We believe that innovations improved all of our lives in a number of ways, but more strongly, we believe that a clear set of principles protecting sensitive data and privacy is critical to consumer trust, and then ultimately our collective ability to continue to innovate and drive new use cases. We also had a theory we talked about a little bit, as you saw in the demo, that you could treat data protection a little bit like supply chain. We actually have some experience in building technology around supply chain automation, and we thought if we could break the pieces apart and really leverage technology to gain visibility at every stage, as well as automate workflows, at least in part, privacy could also be operationalized. That would ultimately free up resource-constrained organizations to do both the right things for privacy, but then also to focus on their core business. From there, we set out to build both the strategic privacy consulting practice in parallel with building Ethos, which you saw today. Ethos has been built on a strong, holistic approach to privacy, taking you beyond compliance. Our culture wheel truly represents that, and the culture of privacy is something that we believe is really core to everything that we're doing in order to move organizations far beyond compliance and reaction to what regulation looks like. That said, we also appreciate that privacy is still very much human-centric and complicated. We feel that our deep in-house expertise of privacy experts who work directly with our customers to solve those complex strategic problems truly differentiates us at Sentinel, as we know that neither an army of consultants nor a technology tool will truly actually be enough to drive strong privacy principles and embed them in how we do things every single day. We continue to unify the technology and privacy, and we help our customers along that journey as well. All of this positions us really to be at the forefront of new use cases, and we're really excited about it. Chris mentioned earlier things like IoT, certainly an area that's emerging and relatively ambiguous to everyone right now. Ultimately, our goal is to bring together the consumers to really reach them through education, transparency, the ability to actually then broker the relationships with the various entities that we trust our data with as well. So with that, just thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in. We really appreciate your time. We're very excited about the progress that we've made. And ultimately, our customers have truly been at the center of everything that we've built and continue to help us guide better outcomes through Ethos and through our practice overall. Have we had any other questions come up at all? Nope. All right, well, with that, we again thank you for your time. Please reach out to us. You can reach us via contact information sent in the registration link. Many of you have our emails, but also don't forget that we're offering that free assessment and trial. So please go to our website and take advantage of that. We'd love to actually work with your teams directly. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.